Good morning, guys. We're still on factoring. So, you guys should have all gotten this handout, and today's factoring examples are going to be a little more challenging to guess and check. You totally could use the guess and check method that you all learned yesterday to do these problems, and I always encourage you to guess and check first, because this method does take a bit longer, and you only want to use this if you can't figure out how to do it by guessing and checking. So this is a last resort method. You're going to use this method when the A value and the C value have lots of factors and you can't figure out what has to go where. So for example, if we look at this first function, we have 6x squared minus 31x plus 40. Factors of 6 could be 1 and 6 or 2 and 3. Because we always start by finding the factors of A, and then the factors of C. So we could have, for factors of 40, 1 and 40, 2 and 20, 4 and 10, or 5 and 8. So when you would attempt to guess and check this problem, there's a lot of different combinations that could occur. For example, you could have 1 and 6 in the first spot, or you could have 6 and 1, so you could have 1 and 6. You could have 6 and 1. You could have 2 and 3. You could have 3 and 2. So those are all options for the first location. And then in the second term of each binomial factors, you could have 1 and 40. You could have 40 and 1. You could have 2 and 20, 20 and 2, etc. 4 and 10, 10 and 4, 5 and 8, or 8 and 5. That's a lot of different combinations, which you could figure out, okay, especially if you're really good at your multiplication facts and you can figure out, well, what has to go in these first ones so that when I multiply it by these second ones, I add up to negative 31. It's possible. But if you're spending too much time guessing and checking and not getting anywhere, then we have this other strategy. So this other strategy is called the grouping method. And it's going to come up later in the year when I teach you how to factor polynomials with 4 terms. So it's a good strategy to know now because it will come up later. You set up kind of like an X chart here. You'll see that in green. And in the top of the X chart, you're going to multiply your A times your C values. And in the bottom, you're going to write your B value. So that's already done here for us on the right side. When we multiply 6 times 40, we get 240. And then the B term is a negative 31. Make sure you are paying attention to your signs because the signs do matter. So the goal is to figure out what is going to go here and here. And those two numbers have to multiply to 240 and add up to negative 31. 240 is a pretty big number. You got to figure out factors of it. My suggestion is you just start taking 240 and dividing it by values on the calculator until you find a pair that works. So for example, 240 divided by 2 is 120. But 2 and 120 don't add to negative 31 or subtract. And then you could do 240 divided by 3, 3 and 80. 3 and 80 do not give you 31. 240 divided by 4, you get 60. 4 and 60 cannot give you 31. 240 divided by 5 is 48. We're getting closer. 5 and 48 is closer to 31, but we're still not there. 240 divided by 6 is 40. 6 and 40 can't give me 31. 240 divided by 7 is a decimal, so that definitely won't work. 240 divided by 8 is 30. That doesn't quite add up either. 240 divided by 9 is a decimal. Doesn't work. 240 divided by 10 is 24. 10 and 24 don't add or subtract to 31. So you can see the bigger the number, the more you're going to have to be guessing and checking here. 240 divided by 11 is a decimal. 240 divided by 12 is 20. 20 and 12, close to 31, but not quite. 240 divided by 13 is a decimal. 240 divided by 14 is a decimal. 240 divided by 15 is 16. That is our winning combination. 15 and 16 can add to negative 31 if, here I'd ask you guys what they'd have to be. They have to both be negative. And this works because a negative 15 times a negative 16 is positive 240, and a negative 15 minus 16 is a negative 31. Now, these are not the numbers that go in your binomial factors. So that's why I said this method is a longer strategy. What you do is you drop down your A term, you drop down your C term, and you break apart the middle B term using these two numbers from our X chart. So instead of writing negative 31x here in the middle, I'm going to write negative 15x and then minus 16x. Because negative 15 minus 16 is negative 31. So we uncombine like terms here to create a quadratic with 4 terms instead of 3 terms. What this is going to now allow us to do is factor in parts instead of trying to factor the whole thing at once. We're going to split the problem down the middle, so right after the negative 15x, and we're going to look at each side of the whole quadratic separately. Looking at the left-hand side, we're looking for a GCF that's in common between those two terms, and that's going to be a 3x. If we factor out a 3x, we will be left with 2x minus 5. On the right-hand side, we do the same thing. We look for a GCF between these two terms. And because this leading term of negative 16x is negative, you're going to factor out a negative every time. If it was positive, you'd factor out a positive. So what goes into 16 and 40 are the largest number that goes into both of them. And that number would be negative 8. They both do not have an x, so you cannot factor out an x. If you factor out the negative 8 from both terms, you would be left with 2x and a minus 5, because negative 8 times negative 5, if you were to redistribute, would give you positive 40. You know you did the grouping method correctly if both sides have a common factor, which they do. They both have a factor of 2x minus 5. And the two sides of the equation do need to be separated by a plus or minus sign, so this minus 8 right here is very important. So what we're essentially doing at this point is, I'm going to change colors here, looking at the left term, this is all one term because it's connected through multiplication, and then looking at the right term and looking at what they have in common. So both of those terms have a common factor of 2x minus 5. Think of that like the GCF of each side of the problem. So we're factoring out a 2x minus 5. We're removing that from both sides. And at this point in time, you won't be able to see me covering up. But if I cover up the 2x minus 5 on both sides and pretend I factored them out, you would be left with the 3x right here and the minus 8 right here. And that is our final answer. So the factor both sides have in common, which is the 2x minus 5, is factor number 1. And if you remove that, what you're left with is factor number 2, the 3x minus 8. So this is how the grouping method works. You'll get better at it the more you practice it. And like I said, it's quicker to guess and check. But if you're struggling with the guess and check method, then this is another strategy that we need to strengthen. So let's try the next one. If we look below it, this doesn't have as many combinations. This one I would probably encourage you guys to guess and check and not do the grouping method. But because today's topic is the grouping method, we're going to practice that. But 8 doesn't have a lot of factors and 5 is prime. So it would be much faster to guess and check. But if we multiply A times C, we're going to get the negative 40. That goes in the top. And the B value went below it, the negative 6. So our goal is to find two numbers that multiply to negative 40, but add to negative 6. That might be a little easier to do because these numbers are not as large compared to the first example. And the winning combination is going to be negative 10 and positive 4. Negative 10 times 4 is negative 40, and negative 10 plus 4 is negative 6. So if we try the grouping method again, remember we drop down the A term, we drop down the C term, and we break apart the middle B term. So instead of writing negative 6x, what would you write? Pause, think, and fill in. So we will write negative 10x plus 4x. Once you have your 4 terms, we're going to split the problem in half and do the GCF on each side. On the left-hand side, we're going to factor out a 2x. On the right-hand side, they have absolutely nothing in common, but we still need to factor out something for grouping to work. Because our leading term is positive, we're going to factor out a positive 1. Please actually write the positive 1. It'll make the process a lot easier. And since factoring out a positive 1 doesn't change anything, we still have 4x minus 5. We look to see what both sides have in common, which they should have something or else something went wrong. They both have a 4x minus 5. And if we factor out the 4x minus 5 from both sides, we will be left with a 2x and a plus 1. There are our two binomial factors. So we're going to continue practicing. If you guys flip to the back, there's a bunch of practice problems right there. You're going to do most of them on your own, but I'm going to do one more with you. And that example is going to be number 9. So at the very end of this worksheet, we're going to do number 9. I'm going to make this a little larger so we can see it better. Okay. So any ideas on what we would do first in this example? Because 30 is really big. So isn't 36. That's going to be a huge number. There's something that I would want you to notice before we go ahead and start the grouping process. I'm going to let you think about that for a moment, and then I will give you the answer. This would be a good time to pause. So these both, or all terms in this trinomial, have a greatest common factor. So we can start off by taking out a GCF. The GCF of 30, 21, and 36 is going to be 3. They don't all have an x, so we can't factor out an x. So we'll take out the 3 from everything first, so divide all the terms by 3. And now we are going to do the grouping method with the 10x squared, the plus 7x, and the minus 12. Could you guess and check? Totally. Definitely a great strategy, and that's the one you should always try first. But 10 has a few factor pairs, 12 has a few factor pairs, so if you're struggling with guessing and checking, we'll do the grouping. When we set up our grouping chart, we have to make our own x this time. We'd multiply 10 times negative 12. We're going to basically ignore this GCF of 3 for a little bit. 10 times negative 12 is negative 120, and our b value is 7. So just like the first problem, 120 would have a lot of factors. So you would do 120 divided by 2, 120 divided by 3, 120 divided by 4, until you find a pair that adds up to 7. So the winning pair on this is going to be 15 and 8. In order to get a positive 7, we're going to have a positive 15 and a negative 8. 15 times negative 8 is negative 20, and 15 minus 8 is positive 7. We're going to bring down the 10x squared, bring down the negative 12, and break apart the 7x using the numbers from our chart, which is positive 15x and minus 8x. Splitting the problem in half and looking for what on each side? Yes, GCF is the correct answer. Still a little weird talking to no one right now. while I'm attempting to teach this lesson. So looking at both terms, GCF on the left is going to be 5x, leaving you with 2x plus 3. And sometimes the GCF could be larger. Like if this 15x is a 20 instead, then the GCF would be 10x. So you've got to make sure you find the largest or the greatest common factor. On the right side, negative 8 and negative 12, because the 8 is negative, I'm going to factor out a negative, and I'm going to factor out a negative 4, leaving me with 2x plus 3. Anytime you factor out a negative, your signs will change. They both have a factor of 2x plus 3, and if we factor that out, we will be left with 5x minus 4. This is technically, though, not correct. If I were to redistribute this, I would get back to the 10x squared plus 7x minus 12, not the original problem. So it's important that you don't forget to bring down any GCFs that you might factor out in the beginning of an example. So you have to bring down that 3, and that is your final answer. So this is called the grouping method. It's another strategy for factoring quadratic trinomials that have a lot of factors for A and C, and guessing and checking is taking too long. All right, so now you guys are going to practice this for the remainder of class and finish it for homework and get all that practice in. See you next lesson.